The story of Dr. Oscar Arias is that of a remarkable man and a remarkable country. As president of military-free Costa Rica, Arias extended his nation's peace to its neighbors, brokering a historic treaty that restored peace to war-torn Central America in the 1980s. Today, this dignified Nobel laureate encourages other leaders to choose human lives instead of weapons and works toward the day when the word us refers to all of humankind. Oscar Arias Sanchez was born in San Jose, Costa Rica in 1940 to a family of wealthy coffee growers. When they asked the quiet, serious boy what he wanted to be when he grew up, to their surprise, he answered, President. In 1948, when Arias was 8 years old, Costa Rica experienced a profound transformation. The country's incumbent president refused to relinquish power to the newly elected president, prompting a civil war led by Social Democrat General Jose Figueres Ferrer, who emerged triumphant. After his victory, though, Figueres did something unheard of. He became the first victorious general to abolish his own army. Why take this unprecedented step? Figueres replied simply, why not? Citizens celebrated as military funding was rerouted to infrastructure, education, and healthcare, and as military buildings became cultural centers and schools. Watching Costa Rica become the only sizable nation in the world without a military or military base, and seeing his country's quality of life improve as a result, Arias later beamed, mine is an unarmed people. Our children go with books under their arms, not rifles on their shoulders. While studying at Boston University, Arias wrote to U.S. President John F. Kennedy expressing his views on the U.S. Central American relations. Surprisingly, Kennedy, one of his greatest heroes, responded by inviting Arias to meet him at his vacation home. Arias later received his doctorate in political science from the University of Essex in England. Upon returning to Costa Rica, Arias met Figueres, then the president of Costa Rica, who was so impressed with Arias's ideas that he appointed him Minister of Planning and Economic Policy. Around this time, Arias met Margarita Penon Gongora. Although her friends labeled Arias that lunatic who wants to become president, she believed in him. They married and had 2 children. Meanwhile, Arias's career skyrocketed. Elected as a member of Congress and as Secretary General of the National Libertarian Party, Arias decided to pursue his lifelong dream and run for president. Whereas his opponent wanted to revive the military, Arias ran as the peace candidate and won the 1986 election, making him, at age 45, Costa Rica's youngest head of state. Upon his inauguration, Arias faced significant challenges as Central America was embroiled in what has been called one of the most deadly, most complicated, and most hopeless situations in the world. Civil wars raged throughout the region, fueled by military support from the U.S. and the Soviet Union, claiming more than 100,000 lives in Guatemala alone. Dictators and rebels fought bloody battle throughout Central America. Death squads kidnapped and killed people who protested such basic things as poor living conditions in El Salvador, and Sandinistas and Contras clashed in Nicaragua. Hoping to prevent the violence from spreading into Costa Rica, on his first day in office, Arias met with leaders of 9 Latin American nations, calling for an alliance of democracy and freedom. Boldly, Arias ordered U.S. military advisors and Contras to leave Costa Rica and announced that Costa Rican soil could not be used for any military purpose. In reaction, the U.S. withdrew tens of millions of dollars in aid from Costa Rica. Nonetheless, Arias would not give in, revealing, "I was told by some U.S. officials, very straightforwardly, that Costa Rica was not a viable country because we had no armed forces. My reply was nonsense." Believing the solution for ending the conflict would come, not from the U.S. or the Soviet Union, but from Central America itself, Arias set out to do what many people thought was impossible: convince all leaders of all war-torn Central American nations to meet face-to-face and discuss peace. On a humid summer day in 1987, Arias and the presidents of Nicaragua, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras convened in Guatemala. After 2 days of intense negotiations, the presidents signed what became an immediate guerrilla war ceasefire, amnesty for all political prisoners, free elections, and respect for human rights. For his efforts, Arias received the 1987 Nobel Peace Prize. He humbly accepted it on behalf of the people of Costa Rica and the other Central American presidents. After some initial progress, it looked as if that peace plan might fail. Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega refused to share power with the Contras, and the other presidents could not convince their army generals to abide by the peace plan. In efforts to overcome this hurdle, the presidents reconvened, and Arias gave a moving discourse about democracy, and surprisingly, President Ortega announced that he would allow open democratic elections in Nicaragua. Encouraged by this unexpected move, the other leaders devised a way to disband the Contra army and reintegrate its members into society. As a result, U.S. Congress voted to send $2 billion in non-military aid to help the nations rebuild. With the peace plan saved, Arias refocused on his own country. During his term as president, Costa Rica maintained its status as having the highest standard of living in the region. The gross national product grew an average of 5% each year, and unemployment dropped to 3.4%, the lowest in the hemisphere. Arias said, "If you want to bring tourism, who is going to come to a country where there's a civil war?" Under his leadership, Costa Rica balanced prosperity with a sense of cooperation, as Arias sought an economy in which men cooperate in a spirit of solidarity, not an economy in which they compete to their own extinction. To Arias, this spirit of solidarity encompassed not only his own countrymen, but all of humanity, as he proclaimed, "The future of the world will be magnificent when the word us refers invariably to all of humankind." Arias completed his first term in office in 1990, and at the time there was no provision for re-election in Costa Rican law. After leaving office, he dedicated himself to campaigning for demilitarization throughout the world, collaborating with the Arias Foundation for Peace and Human Progress, the nonprofit organization he had founded, with a monetary portion of this Nobel Peace Prize. During this campaign, Arias highlighted connections between military spending and poverty. He declared, "Ultimately, I want to tell people that we can end poverty. At the present time, the clear way to do it is by cutting military spending and redirecting funds to human development. The poor of the world are crying out for schools and doctors, not guns and generals." At least two nations have followed Costa Rica's example. In 1994, Panama constitutionally abolished its military, giving Costa Rica and Panama what has been deemed the most secure border in the world. Then in 1995, due in large part to the influence of Arias, Haitian President Aristide disbanded his nation's armed forces as well. Further, Arias helped create an international agreement called the Framework Convention on International Arms Transfer. Supported by 19 Nobel Peace Prize laureates and several humanitarian organizations, the convention urged countries to allow the sale of arms only when buyers met strict standards, such as opposing terrorism, respecting human rights, and conducting human development programs. When detractors argued that if one nation did not sell arms to disqualified buyers, another nation would, Arias countered that, well, this was precisely why globally respected standards were needed. Others objected that the convention opposed the law of supply and demand. Arias responded, we must not enrich ourselves through the commerce of death. We cannot let the free market rule the international arms trade. Too often, this trade is a friend of dictators and an enemy of the people. In October of 2006, the United Nations voted to begin work on a comprehensive binding arms trade treaty, bringing Arias' dream much closer to being a reality. Wishing to serve his country again as head of state, Arias ran for president in 2006 after a constitutional reform was enacted to permit re-election to non-consecutive terms. He won, albeit by a small margin, because of his views on a controversial trade agreement, becoming the first Nobel Prize winner in history to be re-elected as a nation's president. Ever the peacemaker, Arias said, I will have to pay attention to half the population that didn't vote for me. I am a conciliatory, humble listener. If the past is any indication of the future, then, as Arias' campaign message stated, for Costa Rica, the best days are to come. Likewise, if more world leaders take Dr. Oscar Arias' ideas to heart, perhaps someday this message will also ring true for other nations. Then more children will carry books instead of guns. More leaders will talk at the bargaining table instead of fighting on the battlefield. And the word us will refer to all of humankind. We will now see a few more famous quotes from Oscar Arias, followed by a song.